something like a whole new instrument or dance form that I don't think I would have ever been given that opportunity had it not been for Mortal Kombat. I would have just kept going down the hard style route.
I never left Shaq Fu. That's where I and you like Daniel, you had to play multiple characters.
Yeah.
As well. So was that rough? Was that a lot of hours?
No, it was not rough. It was not hard. It was not tedious. It was fun, creative. You know, someone asked me earlier today about like the difficulties in changing styles, and I think Danny, well, Carlos for sure, can also attest this. Like in martial arts, you might have a hard style or a soft style, but there's all these animal forms that are within your martial art, and they have their own kind of dialect, and they have their own kind of character persona, like Cobra or kind of the snake category versus the crane style. Like if you all watch like Kung Fu Panda, I mean, this is all predicated on these concepts. You have movement patterns that you had to learn. So whether you performed katas in competition that were tiger in derivative, it still fell under karate, as Kung Fu had their own forms that were tiger. And there were some crossover movements because it all kind of originates from the same place. So that was kind of how Danny spoke to me, was like, well, think about your animal forms. Like, think about what your forms do, because I was like, well, I don't really get what you want me to do. And all I did was draw upon my forms background, and because we were all forms competitors, we were able to speak a language that was very similar. And I was like, oh, I get it now. Like, you know, in this style, and this would be like this in a different style. And that's kind of how the variation in the characters for me were developed, because Danny was just like, and John, Katana's like the good one, and Melina's like the bad one. So I kind of was like more craney in the good one and more snaky Cobra in the bad one. And that's where like the hand came into play, because I had a Cobra mini form that you have to do for all these belt exams. You guys gotta understand, like when you're a yellow belt, like you have to do it. And then when you're a blue belt, you have to do it again and add. And then when you go to your purple belt, you're still repeating. So you know these things like the back of your hand, like learning a piece of music, your first piece of music. Like a concert pianist is gonna know chopsticks inside and out because it's the first piece of music that they learned. That's how forms were for us, and that was kind of like all we did all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big myth to think that we went into the studio and they had everything organized. They didn't. John didn't have anything. The first day of shooting, I recall him set up his dad's camera, and he looked at me, he's like, do something cool. We spent 6 10-hour days filming every Kung Fu or martial arts that I knew movement to try to figure out how to create the game. And then later on, him and Ed took a look at what was going on, and then we were like, okay, this will work, this would work, this would work, this would work. And then they would bring it back to me, and I'd be like, well, if we're gonna do this, we need to do this and that. So together for about, I would say over 3 weeks, Tobias and I tried to create a pathway to Mortal Kombat. So in the end, it took us about almost a month to have anybody else come in. So within a month of working like, man, yeah, 6, 7 days a week, we invited Ed to come in and take a look at what we created. And so he was the one who would make the adjustments. That way he could program it, him and his programmers could put it into the game. But basically, again, when any of the old school 1 and 2 guys would come in, we would just let them do whatever they wanted. They would create the characters. So
I had the benefit of that experience, so that by the time I got there and I was giving suggestions based on their kind of guidance, they'd be like, that would never get picked up. So like, let's go back to like Cobra style. Like Melina's hand, it's not supposed to look like that's what it would look like as a hand puppet, but when you open your hand up, it couldn't pick up that kind of detail. It would actually disrupt whatever I think the digitization and programming. So we ended up with like this weird just open mouth thing and trying to hide the thumb in certain angles, and then they'd be like, no, can you do that again? I can tell that the thumb is gonna block, your opponent's head or something. You know, so there were these things that they had already worked out. Same thing with movements, where they had to be able to be captured according to the frames per second that the technology lend itself to at the time. So yeah, you come up with like amazing spin kicks and jump kicks and all this, and then Danny would be like, we'll never catch that. You can't jump in slow motion. Then he had tricks to get us to jump in phases of slow motion, and then they would just see later on, they'd film it, and then if they could work with it, they'd work with it. There were a ton of things that we did that didn't work, that isn't in the game because the technology at the time couldn't do it. And he had kind of worked through so much of that with all the other characters. So for me, I came in with like a lot of guidance from Danny, like, no, you're not gonna be able to do that, or that's not gonna work. Can you slow that down?
Yeah, and two, we're in a 8-9 month, right? Yeah, we're 8 month cycle. So we have to have this game done in 8 months, but there was never a game ever done like this. So it wasn't like, I think the management didn't realize like anything.
It's an understatement.
They didn't realize what we were doing. They just wanted it in 8 months, but it's never been done before. They didn't care. They just wanted 200 cabinets ready in 8 months, and it was just
do that magic thing you do, and that's not my part.
Yeah, exactly. So it was really time consuming, and
You know, I actually have some never before seen footage.
okay.
If you don't, can I play this?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting. What if I just play and then we'll explain
Okay.
some things that are going on. For the first time for you guys, I see you guys all on the internet. Is that all right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Turn your screen to us so we can see it too.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of shots here.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. You like came, you just like walk right through.
One more time.
Okay, that's one. And if you don't know, that was Ed Boone. That is that him on the basketball?
Yeah, he's playing basketball.
I got this clip. It's pretty interesting. This is Daniel Cassini.
Okay, look at
It's interesting. I look how
Oh, nice. He's just playing basketball in the
as
background.
a film director, how distracting is that? when you guys are
Well, we're filming, and the whole thing is there's so many. We were creating so many concepts during like just the filming. It was the muse. It was like everything that, everything that was going to be going into the game. Actually, some of the ideas that they used for later games, like tag teams or, brutalities, that was all created in the first game by us. It wasn't, but the whole thing is you got to wait a long time because the process was so long. So sometimes you get bored. And two, somebody had to listen to the ideas to kind of remind us of what was going on. So Ed kind of took that position where he would hear the concept and remind us later on, oh, hey, let's do this, so, but he would get bored just waiting for us to create something. Sometimes it's a little difficult to create stuff, on the fly. So, It was a little annoying.
But it's good that you set the foundation, so people like Kat can come in and they can do it a lot
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah.
Carlos, you worked with Mortal Kombat for years, all of the games coming following. Is there any characters that you remember that never made the cut that you wish would have made it, or they're just too hard to bring into a video game world? Is there anything like that? I should have prepped you for that one.
No, I'll take the question. You know, because it's my own opinion. We had a lot of characters like from Deadly Alliance, I mean, all the way up through MK1. You know, I worked on development for 27 plus years.
Thank you, brother.
Worked on MK1 for 2 years, and then I retired. But there were quite a few when we first started that cusp of going from arcade games, which was MK4, to Deadly Alliance. There was this, once again, it was just like when Catalan and Hosung and everybody else came in, you know, there was this creativity flow. And between 4 and 5, MK4 and 5, there was that creativity flow again, because we had new people coming in, new artists, new talent, not taking away anything from the group up here, because what I tried to do was draw upon everything that they did and keep what they had defined and keep that history, you know, for Katana or for Cage or anybody. But there were a few characters that we were just limited because at the time, you know, there was there's no 4K, 2, higher res meshes we couldn't do. You know, I remember creating a dragon type lizard character called Tiamat that we tried to pitch, but at some point we had to scrap it because, you know, we didn't have enough mesh, you know, mass to put in the game. We were limited, you know. It's PS2 compare PS2 game to now, the detail that we have now, you know, with you know, Unreal 5 engine and everything. And, you know, working with Maya was at like, I remember working with Maya when it was like 1.0, you know, and buffering the frame rates. And I was like, I was actually delegated to structure the pipeline for the Mortal Kombat franchise, and they're still using it today, which is a testament of like how much you have to have this passion and labor of love in whatever you do. And this is for everybody. Whatever you do, just be passionate and love and do good. Just try your best at doing your best, you know, because we always beat up ourselves and we always look at ourselves like, oh my God, I can't do this or that. Just take your time and try to do that labor of love, exactly what we did up here for MK. You know? Tiamat, and it's a draw off of, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, you know, because we would play D&D and stuff. But, you know, there were a bunch of other characters that, during that time, I'm sorry to take up time, but it's just the influx of like, you know, all these memories. During that time, I remember having to figure out the pipeline, also having to do what my brother did, the combat, you know, come up with a combat concept designer. There was one lead designer at the time, and I took the other role, not saying I took his role, but, you know, trying to help out. And at the time, you're supplementing, you know, I was animating, I was doing concepts. You know, I was also doing the motion capture. I was also acting and performing and doing all that. You know, I had many roles, and it's just there was a time like for 2 months where, you know, we're all feeding off of each other. You know, we had Alan Ditzig, we had, you know, Steve Moran, we had Carl Patton Sr., Bruce Mangabat, all the old cats from Deadly Alliance. I remember we would all draw off of each other, feed off of each other. We would do like 6 to 10 sketches a day a character. You know, and a lot of those characters didn't make it because one, sometimes we were like, well, yeah, that doesn't fit the MK universe. And 2, you know, you're like, yeah, this is a great character, but this is, you know, our limits. You know, and that's where Tenchi was born and all those other characters. You know, and it was just great having that synergy and energy to draw off of each other. And that's the same thing we had with MK1 and 2. We had all these performers up here, and I'm not leaving out Paul, because he was also, you know, he also was an integral part in MK. And he would know on his end of how he had like Greg Ferris and all those other guys, those old school cats, and you guys would draw off of each other, like, hey, I got this gig, and you're like, oh yeah, I know. Not that you know exactly what is needed, but you knew exactly at some point how to execute certain things, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The support we got from each other in that was really, you know, remarkable. Greg was actually my boss when I was an employee at Valley Midway between 82 and 84. I went to a lot of games in that time. I went 2 years of that. I mean, I cranked out about 7 or 8 games, including Tron and 3 Pac-Man games and, you know, all kinds of stuff. Satan's Hollow, Spy Hunter. You know, I was in the right place at the right time a lot. So, what was it? Yeah, and I worked with George Gomez a lot, all the time. Tron, Satan's Hollow. You know, yeah, that was my, like, from day one. In fact, George was in the interview. When I interviewed for the job, George was in the room. So that's the first time I met him. So, fast forward now, 10 years later, I'm freelancing for about 8 years. And Greg Ferris calls me up and says, hey, we got a fighting game that we want you to work on, and come on down and check it out. It's called Dragon Attack, and I said, okay, great. You know, to me, it was another job, and went on down there. And in that first meeting, it was Greg and John Tobias and Ed Boon and Jack Hager.
Jack Hager, yeah.
And I remember we talked for like an hour. You gotta remember that the game was already like in mid-stride. The only reason I was even there was because Jean-Claude Van Damme bailed. All right, and so now there's like this panic that's running through management because they're idiots. All right? You may get an idea that I have no love for management. They're just idiots. It was almost as if, you know, whatever they wanted to do the opposite, and they would have been successful. So anyway, all right. So now management has this hardwired into their little tiny peckable brain that it's going to be a big flopola because Jean-Claude Van Damme is gone, right? So we're just going to make 200 games, we're going to blow it out. We don't even want to tie up a staff artist. Greg, can you get somebody that, you know, just a freelancer to come on in and just blow this thing the hell out of here, okay? And that was the attitude from the beginning. And that was the way they approached it to me, that's the way it was told to me. You're just here to do it as fast as possible, pal. You know, rock and roll, jump on and get out of here, out of my face.
How many hours did you spend on that?
A lot. A lot. So yeah, and that was the thing too. You know, they were in a big hurry because like all of a sudden it's like midstream. All right, so now that first meeting we're talking about an hour and a half, and I'm writing like crazy. You know, my pen actually ran out of ink at one point, and we get to the end, and I'm pulling all my notes together, and Ed Boon goes, "Oh, almost forgot. We're changing the name to Mortal Kombat." Yeah, led with that an hour and a half ago. Yeah, so I actually had John Tobias as comp that he had done with the words Dragon Attack on it, and my pen had died from writing for an hour and a half. There was a green marker on the table. I just grabbed that and I wrote Mortal Kombat with a C. And I remember Ed looks over my shoulder and goes, with a K! Like, of course, how was I? Moron. Or it's a big K, you know. And that's really literally how it was born. I mean, it was pretty cowboy. The whole thing was cowboy. It really was.
Yeah. So they really didn't have any idea of what they're doing. When I think somebody will have to check, but I think when they sold it to Acclaim, they sold Mortal Kombat for $200,000.
Yeah.
And Acclaim made millions because they didn't think the game was, you know, it was our game. It
That's
was
part of that
basically-
mindset.
Yeah,
It was really part of that mindset. Yeah.
Just like they thought NBA Jam wouldn't make any
You know,
money either.
and
Give the new kid a shot at it. That was really the whole thing. They looked
so,
at
yeah,
it.
they were
He's
just
got an
not
idea.
expecting it to do anything.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're such geeks, man. We tried to put everything that we loved during that genre into the game. Shogun
was it-
Assassin, we let
Yeah.
Shogun Assassin and all the blood all over the place. So we were like, oh, it has to have blood. And so John was like, okay, we'll put blood in the game. So then we took the blood, drew blood, and gave it to Ed, put this in the game. And I think that was just the process, you know. We create something, John would be like, oh, I like that. Okay, give it to Ed, let's put it in the game, let's put it in the game. So it's kind of like everybody had their contribute.
You know, I think that probably the biggest success of this game was the fact that that was happening, and management, because of their attitude, had kind of removed themselves from the equation, which was the most wonderful thing that ever could have happened, because now you didn't have them leaning over your shoulder, looking over your shoulder, and changing things that they didn't know what the hell they were doing, which is always what happened. You know, so everybody was in there putting forth their best effort, doing their best thing without the interference of you know, the powers that be from the ivory tower. And I think that was truly one of the reasons that this was such a successful game, because you had all you had this gathering of incredible talent that all put forth their best efforts. In spite of you know, a management that had no faith in the project whatsoever. It never faltered you at one little tiny bit. You know, despite all the phone calls I got with them, you know, browbeating me and whipping me, and you know, when's it gonna be done? How's it gonna? They didn't care what it looked like. Just when's it gonna be done? You know, it's demoralizing. I didn't let it bother me. I know you guys didn't let it bother you, and I think that was probably the crux of the success of this game. It was just, you know, a beautiful.
No, well, yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those, it's a creative process, and we all had the same culture and subculture that we enjoyed. You know, we were all martial artists, we all loved movies back then. You know, the ripping the heart out, the whole Indiana Jones moment, the Little China, you know, all of that stuff. We tried to draw upon that, and because those were the things that influenced us. And it's not that we were paying homage to those things. And more or less, we were also trying to pay homage to like a history of martial arts that we all brought to the table. Because back in, like Hadlin said, in the day, you had separate schools, you only did certain styles, and you had to stick with that style. But I think we were on that cusp of changing that more or less attitude, you know, and trying to bring both cultures together, whether it was, you know, film, martial arts, which, you know, today is kind of taken, not saying take it for granted, it's just the norm now, you know?
Yeah.
And back then, you know, tournaments were the only
Kinda
places
is
where we
taken for
saw
granted
other
today.
styles. You didn't, you know, like if you were in a karate school, karate dojo, and that's like what you were raised in, and that's what you did, you really wouldn't have ever known what Wushu or Shaolin Kung Fu or Tai Chi. I mean, of course, there's, you know, books. You would never have known what a form actually looked like until you got to a competition. And then you saw these styles, because you know, your entry into every single presentation of forms is, my name is Catalin, my style is, my form is called, may I have permission? And you'd sit there and listen to what your opponents were performing. You'd be like, what style is that? You know, and then as you got higher and you got older and time went on, they then started to create divisions of style. So it would be like a soft style competitor, an open style competitor, a hard style competitor. And then I can remember actually now, I mean, I didn't remember this until right now. You know, you fill out an actual application and you send your check-in and you go to mom and be like, Mom, I'm gonna do 3 events.
Yeah.
You know? And I can remember them event, I went to like one of my, not my first tournament, but when it first happened, you would come, check if you were a soft or a hard stylist. I'd be like, wait, Mom, I don't understand. Like, now in my own category? And then there became open, then there became open with weapons, then there became open with weapons, all style, with music. Like, we were, and they also figured out that this was a way that they could make more money, right? Because for the more divisions you competed in, the higher the fee was to compete.
Exactly.
And that was the only way we got to see what the other side honestly did. In the 80s, that was really the only way. There was no way in the 80s you knew what wushu looked like, or they knew what karate looked like, other than, watching a movie. But it's not the same. Movies are not the same as the real thing. So that was a really cool resource, I think, for us. And then for sure, I know you mentioned to me that just being in the tournament scene, you understood the styles firsthand by watching them, because we've been a competitor for a really long time as well.
Yeah, and with creative, we had, it was Tobias's basic, he's the main creator of Mortal Kombat. He let everybody else jump on and create it, but he was always whatever was best for the game. Like, I can recall times where I had the power to override Ed. Ed had an idea, and I was like, that idea is terrible. I'm not gonna do it, because I can work for the company, I gotta take him out. But I'm like, I'm not gonna do it. And then John would be like, well, you got a better idea? And then I'd be like that. I'd tell him my idea, and then he'd be like, oh, that's a really good idea, we're gonna do that. And so John was always willing to listen to, for the first Mortal Kombat, he was always like, whatever's the best idea is what we're gonna do, and we're just gonna take that idea and grow it and try to do it in different ways and see how it works. So I think that, I don't know how it is now, because I haven't worked on the game in 30 years, but him always willing to listen to your idea and be like, oh yeah, okay, let's do that. Oh, let's do this. Hey, I want to do this. How would we do this? He was very open
When
with,
is the next thing?
any concept he had.
Yeah, like even Katana, if you remember, Katana
I
is
haven't
kind
done
of still a hard style. Is it more Japanese style character?
Style?
But she's using a
We might just skip that out.
So that came from Danny and I. At first it was, I think, the staff,
Yeah.
and I
For Jade.
kind of maybe
I ain't gonna
maybe
record that.
Tom's may have been, and I was
This is
like, well,
special,
the
though.
staff was just not going to fit into the schematic of how you filmed the character, right? If you think of the staff as an extension of your body, I can't be this tall and then my weapon be that tall, and then still make the markers within the box and not be striking higher than the microphone stand. And then I was like, well, I've always loved the fan, and Danny was like, yes. And then we enveloped a Chinese weapon into a hard style character, which I think was pretty unique at the time. And I remember, there's always jokes about it and stuff like that. But then even the size, the size was not a weapon that they were thinking about at all. That was my competition weapon.
Once again, Catalin, just think about your journey. This is mind blowing. Your journey of going from a hard style to a soft style, meaning going from karate to wushu, that was your journey, and you actually defined that character to have that, envelop that personality itself, if you really think about it.
So maybe she's the first true MMA.
Yeah.
Well, pretty. No. Pretty much these are characters that we ended up defining, and everybody else afterwards, including myself, has paid homage and tried to keep that instilled in them.
But anyone who plays me doesn't suck. So I appreciate all the other actors after me.
Because Johnny is a legend.
I did get the big, but whoever's going to act like me, with whether it's Johnny Cage, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Reptile, I appreciate them. Thank you. Thank you for representing. Thank you guys.
Mortal Kombat! Thank you guys again so much for being here every year. It's an honor to be able to moderate this panel. It seems like it goes by so fast every year, and I'd like to open it up for questions, but sadly we've run out of time. We got another, unless you have one really amazing question.
You could always stop by the booth and just ask your question.
It's that you saying?
It's no problem.
Go ahead, that's it, you got it.
Are you guys ready for Mortal Kombat 1? What's your thoughts on that?
I was born ready because I worked on it for 2 years and then retired.
Yeah.
All right, let's give it up for the Mortal Kombat guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.